Hey guys, Adam here. We're going to be doing a little bit different of a build today. This build's kind of special to me because this motherboard is actually the very first motherboard that my first computer had with the original processor still. And I was cleaning out some stuff at my mom's house from when I used to live there, and this board was there. And so I'm going to bring this thing back to life. The board and the CPU are the only original components that I actually have from that machine. And we'll go over those in a little bit of detail. But I had a few other PCs. Well, they weren't PCs. I had like a Mac before this. This was the first machine that I really learned how to work on and upgrade and do a lot of stuff on. This is where I really got serious with computers, from 1998 to 1999 when I was like 13 or 14 years old. And so I'm going to be pretty excited to bring this thing back to life. I believe it still works. I have not powered it on, but it worked when I put it away. It was stored in a box. It should be good. The only real problem it has is the cooling fan seems to have seized up entirely, but that wasn't working very well from what I remember anyway. The case that I'm going to use is a very similar, it seems a little bit different, a very similar case to the original case I had. This is an InWin A500 case. It is a full ATX/AT case. We have more memory than I could have afforded really then. These are three 128 megabyte Crucial PC100 RAM, SDRAM. I'm going to be using a brand new power supply because I don't really trust old ones. This is a 350 watt Antec Basiq power supply. It will work well for this build, I think. We have a kind of crappy Sony CD-ROM drive. I think it's a 52X. I'll probably replace this with something a little bit better at some point. The hard drive that I have is a Seagate Barracuda 4. This is a 20 gigabyte model. Of course, we have just a 3.5 inch floppy drive. As far as cards I'm going to be installing, the first is this Creative Labs Voodoo FX Banshee. This was something I ended up upgrading to later. It's an AGP card. Unlike the earlier Voodoo cards, you don't need a separate 2D card. This does the 2D and the 3D in one card. So it's pretty cool, you know, for the day. I have a Creative Sound Blaster Live. My original one was an ISA card, like an AW64 or something like that. I did upgrade to a PCI one later. And this is something I did not have. It's just an Intel gigabit, or this isn't gigabit, this is the 10 base T100, because I want to be able to transfer files to this. Originally I would have had a modem, but there's no sense in having a modem anymore. To replace the cooler, I have this Cooler Master unit. This is actually for a socket 370, but it should fit, even though it's a little bit bigger, as long as it clears. There are some capacitors that are very, very close to the CPU on this board, so as long as it clears that, it will work. If not, I'll just have to find a fan that will fit that. We'll see how that goes. And then I have a case fan here, which is this Cooler Master case fan. It's an 80mm one for the front of the case. The board itself, this is a Asus P5A. From what I understand, this is actually one of the better Super Socket 7 motherboards you could get. I didn't know that at the time. This is just what I had. I wasn't really reading any reviews or anything. It's just what I happened to own. But it is an excellent board. Like I said, it's already configured. All the jumpers are set, so this should run this is an Intel Pentium 1 233 MMX processor. So it should run that without having to do any fiddling, as long as everything still works. And this is what I was talking about. These capacitors are extremely close to the socket here, so I'm not sure how well that's going to end up working out. But the first thing that we're going to do is go ahead and clear this table off. I'm going to get this cooler off, clean up the processor, and see if we can get the new cooler fitted here. Alright, so these Super Socket 7 boards were interesting because this could actually take an AMD processor or an Intel processor. I've never liked AMD processors. I've never even actually really owned one. I've had a few computers that I've gotten for free from people that have had AMD processors, but I've always been an Intel guy because of this board, actually, so this is kind of what got me started on that. So these old coolers are pretty easy to take off. I don't know how stuck that's going to be. It's not too bad, actually. So, it's a little itty-bitty thing here. Let's go ahead and set that aside because this thing is toast. We might want to reuse the heatsink if the new unit doesn't fit. So there is the processor itself. I'm going to get a little bit of rubbing alcohol on this rag here and clean it up before I take it out. I do want to take it out and just inspect it real quick. But this is my nasty rag that I use for this sort of stuff. And try to wipe most of that off if I can. Doesn't have to be perfect. I do want to clean it up. Alright, so this works just like any of the, really like any of the AMD ZIP sockets that they still use as far as I know. It's what's called a ZIF, meaning zero insertion force. It's different than modern Intel processors in that, like an AMD processor, the pins are on the actual CPU. Yeah, let's see if I can pull this thing out. It has a lot less of them than a modern CPU. But there's the actual processor and the die. Let's see if we can see in the light here. Get that, read that. Intel Pentium with MMX technology. Now, they did not put the little notch in the corner exactly the same way they do now, but it does have a notch in the corner. It's actually notched out of the PCB or whatever you call this on a processor, and there's actually a matching notch on the socket. It's a lot easier to tell which way it goes because you can see the three pins that are different there quite easily with this board. So they call it a ZIF, or a zero insertion force, which means the processor doesn't need to be like jammed in there or anything. It just kind of drops in, and you drop the arm down, and that's installed. Now, as far as the cooler I have goes, before I put any thermal paste on this, I just want to see if it's going to even fit. So I think I want to put it on facing this way. So there's just a little hook that hooks on a plastic piece on the back side of this board. I haven't done this in a long time, so is that hooked now? I believe it is. Yeah, that's hooked on. So it clears everything really just barely. You can see those capacitors are almost touching there, but they do clear. So I'm going to go ahead and get some thermal paste out and put that on there, and we'll have this aspect of the build done. Alright, so we got the thermal grease on there. Now I'm going to install the memory. These are basically matched. They're all the same kind. For one reason or another, one of these RAM modules is a little bit shorter than the other one, which kind of bothers me, but I'll never see it again once I close the case, I guess, so it doesn't really matter. And these install in exactly the same way as modern memory. You just kind of press it in, make sure it's keyed the right way, which I think it was, but yeah, it is. I don't know why this side doesn't want to go in. Oh, it isn't keyed the right way. I always forget these have that extra key. I haven't done this in a really long time, so the middle key was right, but the other one wasn't. I'm glad they key it, because I would have put it in backwards. So it's kind of, you know, this is kind of interesting because even before this, computers really weren't that different. It's just kind of weird how, as much as a lot of things have changed with computers in terms of power and what they're capable of and stuff, a lot of stuff is exactly the same as it's been for, like, I don't know, 25 or 30 years. You know, the specifications of the memory might be different, but it's pretty much the same process using it, and the same thing's true of CPUs and everything. So that's our board with that propagated. Get rid of this box here. Try to keep this table clear. And the old heatsink, since we won't need that. So we're going to go ahead and get this board mounted up in the case now. Alright, so I'm dealing with the case now. I already took the screws out. This case actually has a removable motherboard tray. It's a little bit different than a modern case. The whole top comes off as one unit, which is actually fairly annoying. I remember that now. as far as the inside goes, though, you could put a completely new computer in here. It is ATX, so cooling would probably be a problem in a newer machine, but it's pretty annoying the way that this support is right down here and these drive mounts and stuff, because it makes it hard to access the board, and the power supply mounts in sideways, which is kind of crazy, but the motherboard tray, of course, alleviates that as being a real problem. It's just kind of an annoyance. So it looks like the tray is already loose here. So we'll just work on this separate from the rest of the case for now. Alright, so this is our motherboard tray removed. This was purchased used on eBay because it actually took me a long time to find too. I've been gathering parts for this for a while, for this build. It was not the easiest thing to find everything I wanted to use for this. Let's see here. Looks like we need to move a standoff. Actually, we're going to have to use one of those stupid plastic standoffs probably down in this corner, because I don't think I can screw in that here, but the other ones look like they line up. So it's really just going to be a matter of getting this loose here. See if I have my little screwdriver tool or anything handy here. So I got that stuck standoff off. Unfortunately, I only have these plastic kind. I'm not sure it's really the right kind. Let me see if I can stick it in the motherboard and have it work anyway. It's not the original type that you would use, but I think it will still work. Yeah, so we get the little plastic standoff in that corner. All the other standoffs that we're worried about line up already. Before I forget, let's go ahead and get the I/O shield ready. Now, I/O shields were a little bit different back in the day. A lot of them you had two screws that would hold them in. This one, I don't really remember how to install. I think it pushes in from the outside looking at it. It must. So let's see. Like I said, it's been a while. Now I kind of remember rocking these things in, and there's metal tabs here I think I might need to bend. This is a used I/O shield. This is not my original I/O shield. Not sure how well that's really going to be secured here. There we go. So it just clipped in pretty much in the same way a modern one would, but it goes from the outside rather than the inside. A lot of these had two screws that would be right here too. This one doesn't. And as you can see here, there's some spaces. This could be used with some. It's kind of a transitional period where there was still AT stuff around, and you could use some of those ports on the back, like serial headers and stuff like that, which I guess they still include on motherboards actually when I think about it. But there's actually provisions on the case for those. So from here on out, this is all just exactly the same as on a modern case. I need to find screws in my giant screw thing here though. So I'm going to go ahead and attach the board, and I'll be back. Alright, so our motherboard is installed. I'm going to go ahead and, while we have the case out, go ahead and put our LAN card in and other expansion cards. That PCI slot was pretty stiff there. Alright, and our sound card. And then the graphics card. Actually, the tab is a little bent on this graphics card, so that's going to make it a little harder to install. Now, my objective here is not to build the most powerful machine I could have built with parts from this era. The idea was to build kind of what I would have had, not if I'd had infinite money, but if it just had a little bit more. Basically just more memory to make it a little bit more usable. That's really the only difference between this and what I would have actually had at the time. I don't remember how much memory I had. I may have at the end of this computer's life had something like 128 or 256 megabytes. I really don't remember. I do know I had something like a 16 gigabyte hard drive at one point, and I know I had this sound card and this video card. So I don't know, my details are a little bit hazy on it from back then. But this is going to be, for cosmetic purposes from the outside, it will look the same. And from processor and motherboard perspective, it's exactly the same. So you know, it's just kind of going to be a machine that I'll probably use for playing DOS games on, and I do have a few Windows 98 era games that don't really run very good on modern machines, so I might bust some of those out as well. I'm trying to unbend this bracket while I'm doing this. Alright, good. This is an old case, so I don't have to worry too much about stripping out the holes on the back there because they're pretty sturdy. So that's our board and our cards that we're going to be using done. So we can go ahead and get the case up here, slide this thing back in, get the power supply mounted, and then start worrying about drives. Right, so I'm shoving these wires off to the side to make sure they don't get caught up when I'm sliding the motherboard tray back in. This is going to be a little close to the camera here, but you're going to have to go a long way back here. So where's that little groove that it goes in? Up there, good. And those wires are good. Alright, cool beans. Everything looks to be lined up. Now I'm actually going to put a couple screws in this so this tray doesn't move around on me when I'm moving the system. Usually the back of the case kind of holds us in, but the case obviously is not really assembled right now, so I'm going to go ahead and just put these two screws in to hold the tray in place while I'm doing this. Alright, so as you can see, access to the board is kind of crappy in here. I can still access everything down here pretty well. Hooking up the power supply I'll probably do from the top because you'll be able to reach up through the top, which is nice. So, for some reason there's these drive rails in here, so I'm going to go ahead and pull these out. Somebody had some sort of smaller device mounted up here. 3.5-inch device in the 5.25-inch bay. And like I said, I am going to replace the CD-ROM drive that I'm putting in because this one's just kind of nasty and it's not really appropriate for the time. I had Creative Labs stuff for drives too. I had at one point like a 2X Creative Labs burner and a 48X CD-ROM drive, something like that. So I'm going to probably forego the burner because there's really no point in having a burner on a machine this old. Because if I need to burn any discs, I'll just do it on a more modern machine. But I am going to look for a Creative Labs CD blaster. So, at this point, let's go ahead and open up our Antec power supply here. Now, I have no idea what kind of power supply I actually had back in the day, because I didn't really care to know back then. It was definitely not as powerful as this one, because I don't think anybody really had, unless you had a really high-end machine, had power supplies like this. But 350 watts is a lot of power for this machine. I think the CPU only has a TDP of like 17 watts or something. Like it doesn't use a lot of power. So this is my first time ever buying an Antec Basiq power supply. It seemed appropriate for the case. It's kind of an old style power supply. It has the small 80mm fan in the back, and it's gray and stuff. So it does have SATA connectors on it, but it has a 20-pin motherboard connector. It, of course, has the 4-pin that can connect to that, but we can use it with this board. So I figured this would probably be a pretty decent power supply, and it won't look too out of place. We can tuck the SATA connectors up out of the way somewhere. So as far as this goes, this just kind of slides in like that. And yeah, that looks like something that pretty much belongs there. So that's good at least. Let's go ahead and give us 5 screws, which is nice. Not that I don't have a million of these screws around, but it's still nice to have more. It's always good when they give you extras. And like usual, just go ahead and get the screws started because you may need to wiggle the power supply around a little bit to get all the holes to align. So don't tighten them down too much. It's usually the top one. I just dropped one of the screws, so I don't really care because I have more. I drop screws a lot sometimes, it seems like. Alright, so now we're putting in the last screw. Let's just go ahead and torque these down to their final torquiness. Now they don't need to be ridiculous, they're just holding in the power supply. It doesn't have to be, so nobody will ever be able to get this thing out again. Alright, so I'm feeling pretty good about that. Now, I don't really know how well you're going to be able to see this on camera. I have to get something to prop this up with, probably. So I can kind of get a camera angle in there. Go ahead and pull this elastic band off. I'm only interested in the motherboard connector right now, and that is conveniently located right up here. Alright, so that's good to go. I'll zip tie everything up a little bit nicer later. Now that cooling fan just fell down. Let's go ahead and see if we can pull this little... Usually this has little clips, if I remember right, that just kind of unclip for the front fan cage. I should be able to just kind of squeeze in on the sides and have the cage come out. Maybe not. Let's pull the front faceplate off and try to get an idea. I thought that's how this worked. Like I said, it's been a while. This is not the easiest faceplate in the world to remove either. Especially because I am trying to not break it. It's fairly old. So like most older cases, all the buttons are connected there to the front, which is irritating. Okay, so this one pushes down like that. So we've got our little speaker hooked up here, and I'm going to get our fan mounted in there. There's no fancy screws or anything with this. You pretty much just shove the fan into the cage and it just kind of rests there. I think these were always 80mm, but I don't know for sure. Throwing stuff against the side of the case there. It's not really the side, I guess it's the whole cover. This is like zip tied. There's so many twists in this zip tie. Or not zip tie, cable tie. It's twisted to a ridiculous extent. Alright, there we go. So, the air flows this way. So we want to put the fan in, probably facing like this, and there's just this little, like I said, this little cage here, and these clips on the side retain the fan, and there's little plastic standoffs that kind of go in where the screw holes are and make everything align correctly. So that should be good to go. I'm not going to worry too much about the wiring right now. And then I believe this is kind of tilts down, and ow, I pinched my finger. There we go. For an old case though, it's not sharp. This was actually, it's sharp in a couple places, but for an old case it's actually not too bad to work in. I appreciate that, because even a lot of modern cases, the cheaper ones, have really sharp edges, so it's kind of nice that it didn't seem like it was very much of a concern back in the day, the sharp edges. So our fan is hooked up. Let's go ahead and plug that into this fan header right here. There's one system fan header on this board, so that's good to go. Might as well plug in the speaker right now while we're at it. Fortunately, everything is actually labeled on this board. It's all silk screened on, which is definitely not always the case with these older boards. Even modern boards, again, don't always do that. So probably get all our case stuff hooked up here if I can get the wire out. So I'm going to get all the buttons hooked up. I'm probably going to need a flashlight though, because it is dark in there. Alright, so we got our front I/O buttons and whatnot. They're not really I/O, I guess, in this case. The front LEDs and stuff hooked up. We have the power supply already in. What else do we need to do? We need to hook up our drives next, I guess. So let's go ahead and grab... We'll start with the CD drive since it's at the top. This makes a little bit worrying of a noise, but hopefully it'll work well enough to get Windows installed, and I can replace it later. And so we'll just go ahead and put that in. We've got our hard drive. I don't think there's really much to hold these in place. I think I actually have to hold it with one hand and screw it in. Yeah, it's just going to drop if I let go. So that's fun. Let's go ahead and get a couple screws ready, I guess. Not exactly the easiest thing to work on, but it's not the worst either, like I said. Considering its age, it's really not bad. So I'm just picking out from my giant screw thing that I have here. screws that I'm going to use. Let me make sure we're facing the hard drive the right way, which we are. It'd be embarrassing to have the IDE in the wrong direction. That wouldn't work so well. I'm going to put this pretty far in, I think. Well, it's going to be easier to access the back of it if it's farther back. So I'm just going to continue attaching drives and be right back. Alright, so I got the IDE cables installed. I'm missing a blanking plate for this, so I'm going to either have to find one or get like a zip drive or something so that that's filled in. Looking here, I used rounded cables. I know some people don't like those, but I've used those for a long time. I used to make my own. I would just strip the wires apart and you could make your own. So I've been using those for a long time and it helps tidy things up quite a bit. So that's pretty much it for the install here. I'm going to go ahead and get a monitor out, hook this thing up to power, and see if we can get it to post. Alright, so I got the monitor out, an old PS2 keyboard. I'm going to flick on the power switch here, and let's hit the button. Fans are spinning. Noises are happening. It's alive! I'm not sure how good that hard drive is. I'm going to try to get into the BIOS here. It works! Cool! Let's see what we got. It's actually got the right date. The time is wrong by quite a bit, but the date is right. That's pretty cool. Looks like it's recognizing the floppy drive. And I'll have to go through this and make sure that everything looks correct here, but where does it tell me my CPU information here? There's my memory. It looks like, I think, yeah, that's all the memories being recognized. Well, I think everything is working here. Select primary and master. There we go. There is no slave computer. And no. And I said no. Well, okay, yes, fine. Secondary master should just be the CD-ROM drive. Fine, whatever. So let's see how far it gets into this post. I don't know if there's probably not anything on this hard drive. I bought this hard drive used off of eBay. Man, that doesn't sound nice. I don't know if that's a CD drive. I think it's a CD drive that was making that noise there. So there's our Pentium MMX 233. That's really cool that this thing still works. I'm happy. Not exactly surprised, but I am happy. I forgot how long. I'm going to have to turn on the quick boot. It's probably good if it checks all the memory anyway, but I'm definitely going to have to turn on quick boot. Are you really checking that twice? You gotta be kidding me. Skip. Skip, I say. Alright, there it goes. Trying to read the floppy. I did not set that up right, apparently. We'll skip. Ah, so there's some sort of bootstrapping issue there. And this is, this is a LAN card's BIOS. It's trying to boot off the LAN card. So I'm gonna go ahead and find my Windows 98. I still have my original 98 second edition disc around here somewhere, so I'm gonna go find that and see if we can get that installed. So this video is running a little bit long at this point, so we'll do the Windows installation in another part. Thanks for watching.